The Mancunian.
The Mancunian.
Now, I don't care how you do it, but I want the Mancunian here tomorrow.
I know you, don't I?
Around this town, the guy was a legend.
The legend of Cliff Twemlow is something that goes beyond the films. This character, Cliff Twemlow, he was a local boy. He was one of us.
You couldn't get more larger than life than Cliff Twemlow.
It's a Bronson. Without a tash.
He was something of a godfather in film in the Manchester area.
Definitely a man with a vision. It was the best roller coaster ride of my life.
Filmmaking with Cliff Twemlow from the early 80s onwards was hedonistic, party, fantastic lifestyle. We were living the dream.
He did what everybody would want to do during the 80s. Fast cars, fast women. He just becomes that person that you want to be.
A lot of it operated on a spare Boeing and a Pratt.
It was all about trying to make a film with no money. I mean, we were all a bunch of kids who wanted to play at cowboys and Indians, and we needed a chief, and that was him.
He kind of encouraged us all, we can do this. Just a bunch of northern lads, we can do it.
A very interesting story of a kind of mini film industry that existed for roughly a 10-year period.
Action!
There has been some conjecture about when Cliff was born, but when we were researching our book on him, Chris Lee, my co-writer, managed to get hold of his birth certificate, and that seemed to indicate 1937.
Cliff lied about his age. He always put 5 years on top of it.
He would never accept growing old gracefully. That's where the disparities in his actual age came about. I think as he got older, he reinvented himself as an older person, so people would say he looked that much younger.
How old are you?
Old enough to smoke.
Cliff Twemlow was from very, very basic working class stock. Born in Hume in Manchester at that time, was row upon row of back-to-back terraced houses, fairly rough area. The family moved in the late 30s to Eccles in Salford.
His father was a merchant seaman at that time, employed by the Manchester Ship Canal Company on the Manchester liners. My father's mother was Ethel Deakin. She was a professional dancer with the vaudeville artist George Roby as one of his dance troupe.
So from a very early age, entertainment was in Cliff's blood.
During the war, my father and his brother were evacuated to a farm in a place called Glossop in Derbyshire.
The children head for the special train, and they're not worrying, they're off on a holiday.
Where they were quite badly treated by a farmer and his wife and not fed properly.
On their return to Manchester, Cliff was determined that he wouldn't be treated in that way again, and that he wouldn't allow people who he cared about to be treated in that manner. So quite quickly he learned how to box and joined a boxing club.
Taught him that he had to look after himself, and he was a sort of skinny little whippet of a scrapper.
Behind me is the Godfrey Erman School in Eccles, Manchester. Interestingly enough, this is where Cliff earned the reputation as Scrapper Twem and became cock of the school in the common vernacular back then.
People in his school knew that he may have been a little skinny kid when he went off to be evacuated, but when he came back, he made sure that he wasn't seen in that light again. And I think that's something that you can see throughout Cliff's life when he becomes involved in bodybuilding, when he starts competing in bodybuilding, all of those things, he starts to be very conscious that, he doesn't want to be pushed around.
He had an awesome reputation within the town that we lived as being a fighter and someone that no one messed with.
And he relentlessly pursued the idea of the body beautiful. This was the kind of thing you'd see on the back of a magazine in those days. It was Charles Atlas. Men, do you have sand kicked in your face?
A golden rule he lived by when he walked into a room, he always tried to remember that he was as good as half of everybody there and better than the rest. And he said, I'd repeat that over and over in my mind, and that would give me the confidence.
And when the war ended, he left home fairly soon. I think he was about 14, and pursued a variety of jobs. He was a cinema projectionist. He ran the Penny Ferry across Barton Canal, which was a Norwegian skiff that had to be hand-propelled across the canal.
I don't know what I'd do without music. What a way to express yourself.
In the early 1950s, his brother got a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and so Cliff there, I think, started his dum-de-da style of composition.
He used to go around with an early cassette player and hum into this.
Dum-de-da-de-dum-da-dum, and then they'd record that, and they got the ambition to get down to Tin Pan Alley in London. They piled into his brother's, I believe, three-wheel car in those days and came back with their tail between their legs. No one was interested in Cliff's dum-de-da compositions then. So his music career wasn't really taking off. He had a go at the early sort of beat groups in the 1960s. He was Steve Reno and the Sundowners. That didn't really come off. And he's at a moment when Granada Television is becoming a very, very important television production company in the UK.
He then got part-time work at Granada Studios as an extra in things like Coronation Street and also The Caesars.
Which was made in the late 1960s, and he was coming home and his car broke down.
The car ran out of petrol. So, undeterred, Cliff strode through Salford wearing his Roman centurion outfit.
Through the streets with people pointing and laughing.
With his helmet under his arm, which when he walked back to the car, he filled up the helmet with petrol.
Some of the people he got to know at Granada were Peter Taylor, who worked in the music department, and he picked up on Cliff's da-de-dum type of compositions and thought there might be something there. And he put Cliff, I believe, in touch with De Wolf in London.
And he's supposed to have written something like 2,000 tunes. And so it was background music, jingles, and even songs. He put out suites of songs.
And he was getting royalties for his music about 4 times a year.
He wrote some very successful themes. He wrote the Crown Court theme, for example.
Distant Hills was a big success. It was recorded, I think, by the Simon Field Orchestra, and they had an enormous hit, #1 hit, with another ITV programme, Van der Valk, for which Cliff's Distant Hills was on the B-side. So, chart success of a Cliff Twemlow kind, not the A-side, but the B-side.
Great theme, made him a ton of money.
And some of his stuff was recorded by the Pretty Things under a variety of names.
I did discover that one of his tunes was in Dawn of the Dead. So he's got proper horror pedigree.
What's it called? 'Cause I'm a Man. The Dawn of the Dead, a hit kind of song. Is Twemlow, isn't it? 'Cause I'm a man. 'Cause I'm a man.
I mean, even though it's Peter Reno, we know who it is.
He used to go as Peter Reno. OK, not as Cliff Twemlow then.
The other person he met at Granada was one of the sound engineers, David Kent Watson, and David Kent Watson will be a key person in the Cliff Twemlow film story.
My first sight of Cliff Twemlow was in the late 60s on the set of Coronation Street. And as a sound engineer at Granada Television, I would find myself using background music on the De Wolf label by a composer by the name of Peter Reno. Little did I know at the time that Twemlow and Reno were one and the same person. When I later set up Indigo Studios in Gartside Street, we spent several years recording his music. He would do a couple of hundred press-ups while he was sat next to me during the mixdowns. At times, the studio felt more like a fitness centre.
I didn't know his first wife, Beryl, but I knew of her, and she was a big stabilising influence on him. And there, when he started writing music and achieving the success.
He lived in Earlham and he had a nice Bentley and the big house. He was doing very well then.
I don't know much about composers or whatever, but I would imagine it's quite an achievement to have had over 2,000 pieces of music published.
So that by the early 1970s, he reckoned he was earning something like £20,000 a year, which was big money in those days.
I was very close to him up until my teens. And then, of course, the separation came. My mother really was just an ordinary working-class girl that didn't want to leave her roots. And my father wanted to go on to better things, and she just wasn't comfortable with it. And I think that was probably how their marriage ended.
And then Judy came along.
I took a job at Indigo Sound Recording Studios. Cliff used to come in, he used to record songs, record music, and it was a time when he was self-penning his own songs. And he did a record called Loch Ness Nessie, The Monster of the Loch. He had a huge papier-mâché Loch Ness monster and had it at the Clansman Hotel by Loch Ness. It had to be the centre of attraction, like the monster was the centre of attraction, so he was very much full on like that, yeah.
I could never say that my father was a modest fella. He was very, very vanity struck.
He was vain. You couldn't pass a mirror wherever it was without looking at himself in a mirror and looking at his hair and things like that. I mean, he had a great magnetic personality. You know, that's why he got where he was.
And one of the famous stories, again, another of Cliff's Peter Reno compositions, was a song called Live and Let Die. Selena Jones recorded this one.
Live and let die, kiss life goodbye, watch the stranger close behind you.
Terry Wogan picked it for his record of the week, and just as it looked like Peter Reno, brackets Cliff Twemlow, and David Kent Watson's Indigo record label were going to have a smash hit, Cubby Broccoli came along and said, excuse me guys, this is very like an ex-Beatles song, which is the theme for our new James Bond film.
Say live and let die.
Can you please withdraw it from circulation?
We finished up in the High Court in London. In time-honoured fashion, we lost the case to the money.
And so I think that's the beginning when Cliff starts to have a bit of trouble financially.
He certainly lost all his money, and you'll find throughout Cliff's story that as it goes on, another relentless, dogged pursuit of failure, in that he's ill-advised financially, he fritters money away.
And then later on in the mid-1970s, Cliff has to declare himself bankrupt.
Well, I know he had the Bentley. That had to go when he went bankrupt. And it kind of started then, and he had to build himself back up again.
Once I owned a mansion money couldn't buy. People used to stop and say, there goes quite a guy. Now I'm left with nothing, and I have no place to go. For when you're down, nobody wants to know.
Manchester in the early 70s, is an up-and-coming city. It's the time of George Best in the late 60s, all of those sorts of things. And I think Cliff fits in with that optimistic, ambitious Manchester, we can do anything attitude that people often talk about.
Manchester, reputed to be one of Europe's most violent cities. Nevertheless, this is my city. You better leave. Where nighttime brings out all the dregs and dropouts of society.
Tuxedo Warrior. One part fighter, one part lover.
Cliff Twemlow was a nightclub bouncer from about the age of 16.
We had the greatest club scene in the country.
Nobody really lived in the city centre, so these clubs were bright beacons that drew people to them.
The Millionaire Club was started by Peter Stringfellow, and this was his first big venture into big city clubland.
Millionaire, and that time, in Manchester was just a magic of its own.
It was a place to be. I don't think there was any other club that could match it.
All the stars used to go, it was all the celebrities. The atmosphere was fabulous.
The discotheque, where people would dress up.
It was an innovation. It was bringing an international standard club to Manchester. It was the first one that there ever was.
It wasn't like work. It was like going out every night.
The Millionaire was the ultimate. Every night was busy.
And Cliff was a tuxedo warrior, a gentleman nightclub bouncer.
He was a head doorman, very humble, very funny.
He had a wonderful laugh. He laughed from inside his belly. Wherever you were at the club, you could hear Cliff laughing.
He always had a smile on his face. He was always laughing. If there was any trouble, he could certainly take care of anything.
He was always immaculate.
I first met Cliff Twemlow in about 1977, 78, when he was working at the Millionaire Club. West Mosley Street in Manchester is the site of the old Millionaire Club. First night that I met Cliff here, he heard a commotion in the foyer area. And next thing you know, I saw Cliff doing battle with two guys. And that's when I intervened and tried to help Cliff, and did help Cliff, actually. We evicted the guys, and from then we became friends. We had a synergy because we both trained with weights and loved to exercise, loved movies too. We discovered mutual love of John Wayne films.
From the thrilling pages of life rides a man you must fear and respect. A man whose unconquerable will and boundless determination. It's John Wayne as Ethan Edwards.
We're two of a kind.
And he wrote, when he was hospitalised after a particularly severe beating, kind of bounced this philosophy called Tuxedo Warrior. But just for that alone, he deserves to live forever, and it's a great title.
And you kind of think, well, so he's singing, he's writing music. Of course he should be a novelist.
The old adage, write about what you know.
I loved the book Tuxedo Warrior. Knowing Cliff and knowing a little bit about his early life anyway from the stories he used to tell was a very interesting take, I thought.
And from his book, I think somebody suggested it would make a good film.
And Tuxedo Warrior was optioned by an American film production company. And Cliff got £25,000. And they asked Cliff if he wanted to go along for the ride as a fighter ranger and stuntman.
But Tuxedo Warrior doesn't go looking for trouble. He is trouble.
We all expected the movie to be made fairly similar to how the book was written. But it was nothing even close.
From $1 million casinos
I'll play these.
to the deadly jungles of untamed Africa.
I mean, first of all, it was made in Africa, and it was about diamond smuggling. The Millionaire Club turned into the Omega, which was a bar in the bush.
Come on in. Omega's got nothing to hide.
And the only relevance, I suppose it had to the story, was that the doorman, or the bouncer, was John Wyman, and his name in the movie was Cliff.
You having some trouble, Cliff? A fist sort of slipped out of my hand.
And Cliff actually appeared in the movie with Steve Powell, but he was called Chaser. And Steve Powell was called Dodo Roberts.
Steve Powell, who was a martial arts expert, a real fighter.
I first met Cliff through a friend of mine called John Capello, who used to run a health studio on Deansgate in Manchester. And Cliff used to train there and mentioned he wanted someone, to help him do stunts and arrange some fight scenes for the film Tuxedo Warrior. We actually used to work out the fight scenes in his garage in the back of his house.
Drinks on the house. Who are you? A friend in need. Bottle of scotch, 2 glasses.
Cliff, by his very nature, was an attractive guy to women, and he was a bit of a ladies' man. There's no two ways about it.
He makes us danger with desire.
Oh, I love you. When he went to make the film in Africa, I used to get letters from different women that I'd obviously been with, and found them in the drawer in the bedroom, that sort of thing. And as I said, a couple of times, he never came back from the Millionaire, and I presumed he was with another woman.
I never ask your business. Maybe I'm just chasing dreams.
I left after that.
And I remember he took that really badly because I just got divorced at the time from my first wife, and he was then divorced from Judy, and it threw us together with that commonality. And then after that, Jackie came along, and for a while it went very well with Jackie, and she was a good influence. But it was Cliff. I mean, that's what he was, a charmer. This is what he was about. He lived as the character. And I think all the women in Cliff's life that he had a relationship with found themselves living with the character, the larger-than-life character.
Me. Tuxedo Warrior. He'll blow you a kiss, then he'll blow you away.
The Tuxedo Warrior movie was Cliff's starting point, really. When he came back from Africa with Steve, He announced proudly to everybody that we're going to make movies.
After he did Tuxedo Warrior, he wanted to do films his own way.
The Pike. Yes, that was a very interesting project.
It was a very typical sort of British Pulp Fiction of that period. A deadly pike in a lake in the north of England.
They're very swift, they're fearless, and they'll eat anything.
And of course it worked. You know, this is the era of James Herbert's The Rats, of The Crabs, all of those sort of British pulp horror novels. And he hoped that would be a film.
It's just that I'm interested in mysterious waters, you know, deep waters, and this lake's very deep in parts.
He naturally just went headlong into it, threw every penny that he could find into it.
None of man's fantasies of evil can compare with the reality of Jaws.
And contrary to what people may think, I started writing this particular story in 1972, and I think that this was before the other film came out, you know.
You refer, of course, to that monstrous shark.
Yes, I do, yeah. Well, we've got a freshwater monster here, you know, as opposed to a seagoing monster.
He said, I want a full-scale image, a painting of the pike. I said, well, how big is full-scale? And he says, well, 12 foot. Oh, right, okay.
Cliff was absolutely blown away with it. And that's when they asked me if I'd like to work on the actual construction of the pike itself. I said, yeah, certainly. Not knowing really what I was letting myself in for, because I'd had no experience of doing anything like that. I said, we want two fish. One that was a still model, which would be just pulled along by a boat, and the other was the robot fish itself, which would swim on its own.
It was all set to go. Finance was in place. We had Joan Collins, who had agreed to appear in it in a major role.
Well, I play the part of a woman who is there trying to solve the mystery of what this thing is doing in the lake.
What do you think of him?
I think he's very scary. What do you think of him? I wouldn't like to be in any kind of water with him. Enormous.
He grew from the imagination of Cliff Twemlow from Eccles, who also wrote the book of the film, the soundtrack, and owns the company who are making it. He even plays a starring role.
And Cliff came in on the scene, dressed like this warrior, who had a bow and arrow and said that he would kill this fish with his bow and arrow. I mean, it got more and more amusing.
Is it in any way based on fact, or albeit loosely?
Well, no, the largest pike ever caught was 19 foot. So I'm still under par, 12 foot, like, you know. And quite recently I saw a picture of a 7-foot pike. And pike can be dangerous, you know, there's no two ways about it.
The BBC arrived, Tomorrow's World, that we had the chance to take it down to Lake Coniston, put it in the water, and see it operate.
A star that doesn't take its cues from some young hotshot director, but from a computer. There's no motor, just a tail assembly in 3 hinge sections, each one driven independently by its own ram. And by coordinating the 3, the fish should move under its own tail power.
It broke down naturally because it was the first time it had ever been in the water.
A key component in the tail section, one of those sensors we showed you earlier, has jammed, and that severely reduced any forward movement.
The pike didn't work. It stopped. It wouldn't work.
So right now, this vicious pike looks about as menacing as a fish finger.
The only thing that would work was the jaw, and they got a shot of that underwater.
But, you know, we've got to remember back in 1975, Jaws didn't work. You know, the shark famously didn't work most of the time.
So it was just a mess. We dragged it up onto the shore. Joan Collins had a picture taken with it. I remember just as they were pulling it up out of the water, the jaws were open, wide. And David was on his computer trying to get this thing to put on a performance, you know, to see what it would do outside the water. And the press all moved in on it to take photographs of it, naturally. And the jaw came up And all this water just spurted out all over the press. I thought, yeah, great. But they really went to town on it after that.
They tore it apart. They thought it was a big joke. They thought it was a big con, which is all very sad. They lost all the money for the film overnight.
And Cliff panicked. He really did try hard to get other finance, but he was just too late. Lost the leading people. It all fell apart.
And that was after 6 months hard work on this damn fish for a film, which I thought would probably help make my name.
But be warned, these lakes will be safe for only so long.
Around the time when Cliff was, should we say, broke as a result of this sort of thing, he was helping me clean the shower area in the gym. It was so typical of Cliff. He'd be singing along, whistling away, and like he'd not got a care in the world. He was able at times to completely detach himself and not be miserable, lift himself up.
Imagine a machine that plugs into your television and records programs from the aerial onto a 2.5-hour cassette.
More and more viewers will want to watch what they want when they want. The solution is video recording. The VCR machine has already begun to change the way we watch television.
Whether you've recorded it from television or shot it yourself with the JVC color camera, ask your dealer to let you compare the JVC VHS with other systems.
He caught the bug, and that's when he thought, okay, there's money to be made in this. He saw the video sell-through business coming in, so he decided to capitalize on that.
Don't be the last one in your street to own a VHS recorder.
Cliff and David Kent Watson realised that there was a fabulous potential market for VHS.
He was ahead of the game.
So he goes to David Kent Watson, who by now has got a video production company called ICE. I think mainly they were doing weddings, and created his own film production company that relentlessly, doggedly, throughout all the upheavals of the 1980s and knockback after knockback, setback after setback, went on and pursued his goal, which was to do things, to create things.
We're not necessarily thinking this film might be on at the Odeon. Why not shoot it on video?
It's tremendously difficult, wasn't it, to get a video camera? Machines were sort of this big to record, portable machines were this big to record onto.
And of course, hardly anyone was shooting feature films on video in this period. It's a real big innovation.
Now he's one man, right? One bleeding man! I know he's only one man, but he fights like four.
That union of Cliff and David worked so well because they both had great heart and great desire. And maybe they didn't have all the technique and the skills at the beginning, but that other thing built in, and then it just grew from that.
And it was very convenient because Dave wanted to make his mark as a cinematographer and director, and Cliff's movies gave him the opportunity.
They didn't say, well, we can't do it because we don't have a budget. They just said, we'll ask people.
That's how GBH was born. Swedish businessman Ingemar Rydström, head of Miss Mary of Sweden Cosmetics, put up a £20,000 budget.
So they decide they will make a film that looks at the battle to control the doors in Manchester's clubland.
That was a more realistic interpretation, really, of his life story. That was much more accurate than the Tuxedo Warrior movie was itself.
This geezer's a real pro. This ain't gonna be easy.
I assumed all the time that there's some sort of authenticity to Twemlow's storytelling, that his time in a tuxedo is paid off now because he's got the stories to tell.
So he brought that reality to it, that grit.
And so we get a sort of Charles Bronson type action film shot in and around Manchester.
Who do you expect? Charles Bronson? Where's that bastard killer?
In GBH, the storyline, it was a very much north and south divide. And Cliff wanted to make the point, if you like, that the North could hold its own.
You know, Keller, when they put teeth in your mouth, they ruin a good arse.
Is that right? In a way, it was like the story of the Krays. I don't know if you're aware of this story, but the Krays came up from London to try and take over the Manchester scene, and they were met at the Piccadilly station by some of the local gangsters.
You know, this is beginning to sound like one of those old gangster movies.
And they, negotiating with the Krays, persuaded them that it wasn't a good idea.
But maybe I should have brought the London team up with me. We can handle it. You took us by surprise.
Cliff's ambition was really to make Manchester the Hollywood of the North.
And I remember being told, Dave, you're never going to get any decent parts because it's all going to be signed and sealed down south. And Cliff broke that mould.
Cliff called upon the pool of talent that was immediately available to him.
It's populated by martial artists of the area.
He knew that people like me and Steve Powell and others could handle a bit of dialogue. We could handle a little bit of the action.
I don't think any of us were great actors. I smashed the bastard. Action was really all they could do. I think action is the way to go. I mean, I can't see me, playing a bloody romantic lead.
Ah, Donovan! Well, how would you be off, Donovan, huh? I got a phone call from Stevie Powell asking me to go to Manchester to meet with Cliff, who I didn't know anything about at the time.
You had enough. Nobody tells Big Nick Rafferty when he's had enough to drink.
Well, he just told me he's making this film and they needed some sort of specialist martial art type things, and I was into Muay Thai and it was pretty fresh at the time, so it was incorporating lots of different moves into this big fight sequence. And what we'll do, we'll map it out and, choreograph the thing between us, and should be fun. And I've never been in front of a camera before like this, so I didn't know what I was doing. And Cliff said, let's just work through what's going to happen. As is usual, it just took a little bit of time, and then we shot the thing. Basically, I got my ass whooped by Cliff, and it was good. I thought, this is fun. And that was how it all started from there.
My role in GBH was my screen debut. Cliff asked me, he said, well, can we have a fight scene? I said, you and Alfie can attack me, we can do this, this, and this. And it was all made up on the spur of the moment. It was funny because Cliff picked me up to slam me down onto a table. He'd not realised that I was so heavy, because as weightlifting regulars, I was a pretty big guy in those days. And I remember him trying to pick me up and I hear him go, oh, that grunt. He slammed me down and he was glad to get rid of me. There you go, bam, I was out.
Hey, remember me out here alone, Donovan?
I mean, I remember being in the Millionaire Club and he came up to me and he said, I'm going to make a film. Do you want to be in it? So I said, yeah, okay. Or I was doing modelling and TV commercials at that particular time.
That's a new Granada, isn't it?
Of course. It's the 2.9 gear saloon.
The new Ford Granada. Let them know you've arrived.
Cliff and I were very close. He used to treat me like his son. The only difference is that I wasn't much younger than him, so... but I looked a lot younger in those days.
It's also a story filled with kind of incredible quirks that, had they been in a script that had gone through feature development, might have been removed.
You and me, in the park. A bit of jogging, how's that?
You got no chance.
Yeah, come on. You try and catch me.
One of the sequences that always strikes me as the kind of strangest, but maybe the most personal to Twemlow, is the sort of endless training and jogging between him and the younger man that builds into a kind of homoerotic romping, a sort of celebration of just how macho they are, that sort of complements the kind of macho qualities, the masculinist kind of qualities that are there, by making it as homoerotic as possible.
And then they obviously fall over together, and well, both of them are out of breath, aren't they? But they look super fit.
I'm not sure how intentional that is, but there's something about men being so tough, so singular, that only they can understand each other.
Bleeding women.
No wonder there's so many queers.
Well, the line, bloody women, no wonder there are so many queers, it does set up scenes of them bonding very, very closely. And you do wonder if the kind of macho facade is part of a huge amount of bluster, or if in reality it's kind of informed by a very masculine culture that he's in all the time.
Now we're really gonna work out.
Cliff's films and the production around them were very much a boys' club.
Women are there, but they're really only there to be a romantic interlude between the fights outside the doors.
You okay? Didn't catch your name.
I'm Jane Cunliffe, and back in 1982, I guess it was, my mum saw an ad in the Manchester Evening News. Someone was looking for the new Ingrid Bergman, so Mum put my photograph in for the competition. Somehow I won the competition, and that's how I got the part of Tracy in GBH.
Like what you see?
From the moment you walked in, I liked.
I was introduced to him as a bouncer, then he was the writer of the story, he was starring in it, and he wrote the music. I mean, the guy could do everything.
The name's Tracy, and I can look after myself.
She was quite a snob, you know, looking down on this guy and what he did for a living.
The big hard type, huh?
Didn't know it was showing.
You know, people are very class conscious in Manchester. I mean, I am Mancunian, but I sure as hell beat the accent out of myself at drama school because there's a north-south divide. So, yeah, that would have been a subject very close to Cliff's heart, I'm sure. My impression of Cliff, yeah, I mean, physically, obviously, he was very imposing, but he was so gentle and a complete gentleman. He was always very quietly spoken with me, very paternal, caring. He was just lovely, really lovely. You can probably tell I'm not a natural runner. I think it's so comical. I think it's even more comical because it's in profile and you see the kind of clop, clop, clop.
I'm gonna have to stop. I can't run anymore.
Trace, we've only done half a mile. We've just begun.
I'd never been on camera before. It was all extremely new. But thinking back on it, I think it was quite new for a lot of us.
Cliff's key skills would be his ability to talk people into doing anything.
I remember certainly on set, there was just a great feeling of collaboration and everybody mucking in.
You're all flying by the seat of your pants, and nobody's really got an absolute job.
We'd work on the production, we'd be shifting tripods, lights.
I'd work behind the camera and generally pitching in, really.
And then Paul has to go to work because he's on the doors at such and such thing. Okay, well, that means we lose the sound guy. Well, John, can you act while you're holding the mic? Yeah, okay, just a bit lower while you know. So you're doing all this stuff and filling in as best you can.
The locations, like the zoo that we use, that was the primary location. Where all the interior scenes of the nightclub were shot. And that's just how Cliff worked it. If you could get in somewhere and they let him have it for free, fantastic, it's yours.
You dirty little animal.
We are at the zoo.
So Cliff would walk into a pub and say, the manager said it was all right for us to film this fight sequence. Now, the odds were that somebody would say, well, I'm the manager and I haven't given permission, so go, oh, sorry, I made a mistake and you'll go. Or the person behind the would say, oh, OK, all right then. And that's how they'd film the fight sequences.
We remember hearing about them filming this fight scene at the Rainbow Room and said, oh my God, someone's making a film around near us. That was so exciting as an 11, 12-year-old.
The Rainbow Room in Eccles, and after all these years, I'm surprised to find that it's still here. And this, of course, was the place in GBH1 where John Barker, a.k.a. John St. Ryan, met his untimely death by someone shooting him from the roof. Some of the more complex stuff there, like the driving, for example. Martin DeRoy was a former racing driver.
I did a bit of racing, and I had the Bond cars at the time.
It's his Lotus car in the car chase, the one from the James Bond movie at the time.
Cliff being Cliff, he taught me into using the Bond cars and the stunts.
The American car, I think it's a Mustang, it swings around the corner, completely misses the mark and ends up knocking a crash barrier over. It wasn't a stunt, it was just an accident. And that's guerrilla filmmaking. Get the shot, move on quickly before anyone complains and reports it to the authorities. No, come on, go, we're off.
And the chase scenes around Heaton Park. Dave said that was a bit close, wasn't it? Because actually, when he jumped off the road, we timed it just right, and I just managed to just clip him.
We did a shotgun hit on this bandit in Heaton Park, and all these park keepers are running after us. And I said, why are they all screaming and shouting? I said, you've got permission, haven't you? He went, no. So we all had to leg it.
I just accepted. I accepted so much of it. Well, this is obviously normal.
When the film came out, I had to see it. I had to find it. So obviously a little bit too young to go and rent an X-rated film at the time, but we managed to get hold of it.
If you like action, you'll love
GBH was apparently a big hit with the troops on their way to fight in the Falklands. This is the very early days of domestic video, and it was World Video 2000, one of their biggest hits. And if you think back in those days, you could rent videos almost anywhere. Newsagents, the corner shop, garages. They would buy a copy, and those copies were like up to 35, 40 pounds, which in those days was quite a bit of money. Then they'd rent them out.
The film sold 9,000 VHS copies in the UK and reached number 9 in the charts.
Well, I've got my copy of GBH, which I've lovingly kept all these years.
It's a big deal to see yourself in a film and it's on the shelf in the shop.
Not for the squeamish. It's certainly trying to out-tough, just as a video artefact. It's trying to out-tough anything else on the shelf.
More brutal than The Long Good Friday. That was the benchmark movie.
A terrifying nightmare from which there is no escape. Long Good Friday.
Forget The Long Good Friday. There's a Manchester story.
It was very gruesome, very real.
This was definitely one of the video nasties, or it fell into that category.
I had no idea I was involved in a video nasty. No.
Blood everywhere. It's like a battlefield.
I'm quite proud, actually.
The Prime Minister sat with other MPs in the Commons today to show the government's support for the new bill to clamp down on so-called video nasties.
And I think GBX got caught up in that, but it was because everything had to be certificated. No one's going to put that through the BBFC again and pay for that to be done.
Cliff liked the idea that it was classed as a video nasty because that's publicity. It gets people talking.
I mean, you look at the cover of GBH, Not for the Squeamish, and a man, Cliff himself, splattered in blood holding an axe. It's not going to be rented out to little old ladies.
Yeah, everybody's, oh, video nasty. They were great. You know, they weren't what they sounded like. They were just a bit bold.
But because it's not certificated, it could be rented out by kids. Hopefully it was, and they might have got some ideas from it.
Across the road from my house, there used to be some shops, and there was a video hire shop there when it used to be a hire VHS, and they had GBH in there, and I'd looked at it, and I think I was too young, but the guy who owned the shop said, no, that's not for you, that's son.
A third of all children under the age of 7 have seen a video nasty.
We loved it. Myself and my younger brother especially, we ended up sort of doing a dupe of the video and watching it religiously and quoting the lines.
And it doesn't seem right. All us lot against one man.
Don't it? What a pity. Maybe you should have him with your bleeding handbags.
It was ahead of its time in terms of it being a film shot on video that allowed people to make their own movie. So first of all, it's ahead of that trend, which is a kind of mid-90s kind of trend, really, when digital video started to really come in. But there are now ubiquitous gangster movies, everything from foot soldiers to craze-based films that are out there all the time. Back there in their past, in their DNA, is definitely GBH.
And so their first foray into films made directly for the video market is something that's successful, and I think that's particularly the film that people remember Cliff Twemlow for, because that's the one people have seen, that there are copies circulating around.
It made a lot of money, and Ingmar and Lars Rystrom made more than their money back. In fact, they made a handsome profit. And Cliff naturally thought that they'd want to then finance another movie. But that never happened. They didn't do that. And Cliff was on the hunt then for other backers because he got the bug.
Cliff has tasted the forbidden fruit. He has bitten of the apple of home video and knows that you don't have to shoot on film. You can shoot directly onto a cassette, you can edit it down the road, and you can get it in the shops, and an enterprise is born.
E-Violent is the location for action, tragedy and revenge. E-Violent explodes onto your screen. A race against time to uncover the secret of ERAM, codename for Intercept, Return and Destroy.
He asked me if I wanted to get involved, and so I came up with the money.
They've gone from the streets of Manchester, the clubland world that they were so familiar with. Now they think, right, let's go international.
We're off to Barbados in 4 hours.
So now we had both caught the bug, and the following year saw us heading for the Caribbean in the summer of 1983 to film Target Eve Island.
So many new things. I mean, I'd never been out of the country. So off we flew to Barbados. Our happy band of brothers. Oh boy, that plane flight. Some of us had too much to drink on the flight because we're so damn happy. And we get to Barbados, we get to this beautiful hotel by the pool, and there's a bar. 3 hours later, sunstroke throwing up all over the place.
No, I think most of the time we was all drunk.
It was great being in the Caribbean.
The beautiful Caribbean provided a background for excitement.
It was utter chaos, really. Professionally, it was utter chaos.
Cliff had always had the idea that he would be a kind of James Bond action hero. Here was this opportunity to do that.
This was a Bond-style movie, co-starring Cliff and Brett Paul from the Millionaire Club.
Obviously, fights ensue. There was sex and all sorts of stuff going on. It was a fun time.
It features Brett Hutchinson as a spy by the name of Grant. And he was called Grant because they figured they could get sponsorship from Grant's whiskey.
Get close to Grant. As close as is necessary.
Why can't we just get rid of Grant?
I was working as a model from the early 80s. Cliff comes along to this place in Manchester, Ice Productions, and Cliff made his mind up very, very quickly about people. He just literally said, "Hi there, we're making movies, we're going to the Caribbean. I see you as the Russian spy, Stella Starlight. Do you want to come?" Yeah.
My name is Starlight.
Our first scene was at the Playboy Casino in Manchester, and I thought to myself, my goodness, I've got to make an entrance in this first scene as Stella Starlight, this Russian spy. So at the time, there were some adverts with Joan Collins, if you remember, and Leonard Rossiter, and she was always wearing something white and glamorous and ended up with a Cinzano in her lap.
Yes, just as I thought, made from the finest Italian rosé wines.
Now from Cinzano.
And I thought, Joan looks very glamorous in white. It's got to be a white jumpsuit for the first scene in the casino. So that's what I wore.
You had a winning streak, Mr. Grant.
Hence, I've worn an updated version of the white jumpsuit for today's, in honour of Cliff.
Excuse me, sir.
Max. Max Beasley was a very well-known impressionist and entertainer on the Manchester club scene.
I mean, that was the Godfather. So you come to my daughter's wedding, and this is what you want to do.
God, that guy can do some good impressions.
Cliff must have seen some of this going on and went, I want to put that character in one of my films.
All the rum shacks and all the towns and all the world. You gotta walk into mine.
I met Cliff for the first time, and it was like a press showing of GBH, and there was loads of people there, and you could see this guy above everybody else. He had a natural charisma that stood out. And he said, I'd like you to play this part. We're going to go to the West Indies, and you're going to be playing like a spy who's in several different characters, so you'll be dressing up, etc. The next thing, I got the script, and the tickets arrived, and we're flying off to Barbados.
Well, what happened anyway?
It doesn't matter.
The other thing that Dave Kent Watson did with Eve Island was arrange sponsorships and corporate videos during the movie.
And I think he was doing all sorts of deals behind the scenes.
And DKW was the master of managing to swap places to stay in exchange for him to make a promo movie of the place. The promos that DKW made for Grenada when we were there involved Brett and I going out in a hired vintage sports car, and we would pretend to be having a picnic. And actually we incorporated it into the film as well, quite sneakily.
This was supposedly a cymbal shoot.
On one of the fight scenes, the cameraman got stabbed in the hand.
And it went through one side and came out the other, and marked his stomach, actually. It actually went to his stomach. And he was rushed to hospital. That was David Kent Watson. And this is where cheap, as they say, cheap becomes dear.
I thought it was going okay, except for the fact that they were short of money, which they're always short of money.
One of the big problems about Dave Kent Watson was reliability. And in hindsight, it's easy to say, but at the time, it should have been obvious at the time. But the worst mistake anyone could have made is give him money. Because the big question was, would that be spent on the production?
One of the biggest lessons you got to learn when you're financing something is to have control of the money. And I didn't. That was given over to Dave to book all the flights, book the hotels, pay for meals, pay for the actors, all these other things, which then we later found out didn't happen. Money went on his bills prior to the movie, so instead of starting with what we thought we needed and budgeted, 2/3 of it went towards that, and then a third, or maybe more, went away on his private bills, so it never got what it deserved.
Cliff and DK were not on good terms that particular time, for whatever reason.
I don't know what happened between them, but yeah, they did have a falling out over that. Yeah, shame.
David Kent Watson wasn't being open with everyone on the shoot about what was going on.
He also allowed his personal relationships to get involved because he was having trouble with his girlfriend, so he probably spent money on her. And I know that there was many people who witnessed him roaming around Grenada and Barbados, shouting for her when she was going off with other people, and he's trying to look for her instead of concentrating on the production.
That, along with some of the funding issues around the film, led to a slight deterioration in the relationship between David Kent Watson and Cliff that had worked so well on GBH.
So it was a ridiculous scenario.
What's going on? Somehow the money ran out, and it wasn't on wages because we weren't getting paid a weekly wage for being there. All the actors and all the crew that were involved, everything would be based on, well, you're on expenses.
So we had to cut personnel that we took with us, cut shooting, and it was just a question of going around the Caribbean, getting things for nothing, which we did pretty well.
It caused massive problems, and more credit to the people who were there in the first wave of filming, because they showed how loyal they were to Cliff to deliver no matter what, even though they were living in near starvation.
Some money went missing, was living on coconuts for a couple of days.
Just coconuts.
We were chucking stuff up at these coconuts to try and get them down because, yeah, there was not much food.
On a beautiful island, but you've got no food and you don't really know where you're going to sleep in some cases. It's terrible.
Anyway, I got a job at the Red Crab, and which meant I had a legitimate reason to steal, which I did. It was food. I got the job and I had the gear on to be a waiter. I could nick food for the crew, and they'd be all sitting there, and then the bill would come at the end, and that would disappear, and we'd survive another day.
What are we living in here? You know, some kind of weird Victorian drama or something.
Barbados, we actually only stayed there for a week, and I think it took me about 3 days to get used to the humidity and heat. It was so hot.
And then we went to Grenada for another 2 or 3 weeks.
It all went to hell when we went to Grenada.
It is a Marxist country by this stage.
When we got there, they basically arrested us, all the guys. And, you know, put us in this room and, you know, get strip searched and God knows what else and what's going on. Then it got worse and worse. They had a guy come out and look at the script and, you know, take it back to the people, the powers that be, and then they came back and they said, you've got to change the script. Now!
The Grenadian authorities wouldn't allow any filming to be done unless the Russian spy won.
They said it throws the Russians in a bad light. What the hell's that got to do with it? We're making a movie, you know.
I have already told you, do not play games with me.
And they had armed guards with them at times to make sure that they were trying to follow the approved script.
And we ended up being chaperoned by armed guards everywhere.
A lot of guys with guns, proper guns, I mean, walking around the film sets and wherever we were shooting.
And there's these kids with, you know, assault rifles, just standing there looking like, yeah, one wrong move, and I'm happy to shoot you because, you know, you're Yankees or something, you know. And it was really hairy.
As you are aware, the Caribbean heads of state are decidedly uneasy about our little paradise island of Grenada. There are even rumors of an invasion of Grenada, an American invasion.
Eve Island is probably unique in filmmaking history because in the middle of the production, a war broke out.
The latest situation as we now know it on the island of Grenada, which is a tiny island in the southern Caribbean. It has been invaded by a multinational force, as it's being described. The bulk of that force, about 1,800 American troops.
The Americans decided to invade the island. And one minute they're waking up to Marines flying up the beach there with a lot of hardware and gun battles taking place.
It was 1983 and a military coup took place.
The US invaded, and they thought that we were mercenaries. Because we're all big lads, you know, we all come in, you know, looking all tough.
They used the military coup to, obviously, to great effect, because how amazing to have a real army with real guns actually turn up on your film set. And they actually directed the army on the beach and made them walk forward. Cliff was charming.
They got these soldiers on the cheap. I think things like that sum him up completely. I think if a phrase fits for him, it's he could always get where water couldn't.
Okay, let's hit the beach.
And then, of course, after that, complete rewrite, get lots of general views of the Marines invading and rewrite the script.
Expecting howitzers? Yes.
It wasn't long into Eve Island falling apart that I got a phone call from Cliff and Martin saying, look, we're going to have to do some pickup shots in the UK.
When we came back, we had no other money for editing and other work and other things that needed to be done here, so I had to come up with more money to pay for that.
You're going to have to change the story. We're going to have to make parts of the UK able to double up for parts of Grenada and Barbados, which is creative to say the least, because we did a lot of this filming in a place called Stile Woods, in between Wilmslow and Manchester Airport, which is nice and picturesque, but it looks nothing like the tropical rainforest and the palm trees of Grenada and Barbados. Eve Island became a standing joke.
Oh, it was the never-ending film.
There was always some more filming that needed, some pickup shots that was needed.
I was actually in insurance, and when I met up with him, they said, oh, you've got an office. Can we borrow your office, please? I said, yeah. Oh, you might as well play a sort of M character, because I had a business suit, and I had to actually grey up my hair, because I did have hair in those days.
This contains all the background information on Irad, Lindenbrook, photos, everything you should need.
Even 3 years down the line, we still ended up, hi, can we go to Britannia Hotel? We just need to do another scene. And went with Brett, and we did another scene. And we all totally forgot that Stella Starlight was Russian.
What? I don't understand.
So I ended up using an English accent.
What are you talking about?
Basically, we decided there was far too much to dub. And then it was decided, DK just said, oh, well, don't worry, she could have been a double agent spy.
Oh.
The friendship with Dave and Cliff was breaking down, and we needed to get the master. And that's when I started getting involved, to try and get the master off Dave.
I have nothing.
I'd sold 3 flats to get the money to do it, thinking I'd get the money back. I gave it a year to get the money back, and then when I didn't, lost the flats. So that knackered me up a bit. I still helped him with anything else he needed to do, but I wasn't going to put any more money into it. That taught me one of the biggest lessons of my life.
I've never seen a completed version to this day, and it's about 40 years later.
Even if something like Target Eve Island's not worked, they're going to keep going. They're going to try and get some investment.
Do you have a film, or are you still writing the script?
He could write a script almost overnight. Within 2 or 3 days, you'd have a proper working script, and it was quite a good one. His secretary at the time, who he used to get to type things up, Jackie, became his living girlfriend. And it was very handy because she was a great typist. So as quick as he could write the notes and write the screenplay on a notepad, Jackie would type it up into some sort of reasonable script format.
Okay, let's do it.
The Ibiza Connection, another great title, I think. It's a plot where it's a filmmaker trying to get a film together. They can't get the finances, they can't get everything in place to shoot it as they want.
And they'd already done the soundtrack to it. And it was the soundtrack was great.
Don't set her free. Cliff self-financed a lot, actually, and he put a lot of money in that himself. Whether he put all the money in, I can't quite say. But he got music royalties that he would quite regularly churn into, substantial royalties he would churn back into the film productions.
I got a phone call from him.
I need your help. The movie's a mess.
I'd never heard of him before, but he got my name from a production designer on another film that I'd just done in Manchester called Gunpowder. And I went to meet him at his house, and we had a long chat, and he had a mad party, and asked me if I'd like to go to be his assistant on this film in Ibiza, which I did. And it became very clear to me on the very, very first days I arrived there that actually I wasn't going as his assistant. I was going as the director of the film. But I'd never directed anything in my life before. So it was a bit of a shock.
I could see that Howard was like, he had that, you know that face that people have like, what am I doing here? I don't know what's happening.
But of course there wasn't any pre-production period or anything like that. You got off a plane and you started filming the following day. You didn't question him very much because he made you kind of believe that everything was going to be okay.
Tomorrow, we start shooting.
He wanted to be one of the team, but he wanted to be the team leader.
I've got a home video of us at the airport. John and I, we were tap dancing. People thought we were potty, but we were so excited.
You've got to understand, you suddenly think, hang on, we're in Manchester doing an everyday thing, and then suddenly we are doing something most people dream of doing, yeah?
We're off to Ibiza for the show, and boom.
Didn't believe it until I'm sat on the plane and thinking, wow.
Ibiza Connection started when the whole cast and crew had finally arrived on the island at Pike's Hotel, where the year before we'd met Tony Pike and we'd watched them film Club Tropicana with George Michael, Andrew Ridgeley. They were there, so we met them.
Well, Tony's the barman in the Club Tropicana video with the moustache.
Tony Pike was mad, complete mad Australian.
And Tony Pike became famous on the music and party scene, the Ibiza beat.
He's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant character.
He had this pool bar, which was a kind of little alcove in one corner of the pool. And he would just put bottles of vodka on the bar for people. Nobody ever paid for anything.
And the first night there was a party.
I'm throwing a party tonight for the film crew and cast.
And Cliff decided to throw a party.
Sounds good.
Not the best idea before a shoot.
The opening night, before we even shot anything.
Parties are at the end, not at the beginning.
All right, the drinks are on me.
It was an insane idea, really, when you think about it.
It was an amazing night.
It was good, though.
It was wild.
People were in cabanas just having sex.
It seemed to me that whatever money had been got was more spent on, dare I say it, partying than it was production value.
Oh, geez, but everybody the next morning. I mean, you're starting first day of filming with probably the biggest hangover that you could imagine.
Well, gentlemen, I must move along now. I have a tight schedule.
I mean, there wasn't a schedule. Schedule didn't exist because everybody was there.
We'll go straight for a take on this, please.
So you just say, right, well, let's do this today. And Cliff would say, well, we're going to do these scenes. So, Howard, what do you think we should do with this? And then he'd hand it over to me and I'd look at the location because hadn't seen any of the locations beforehand because there was no pre-production. And that's how it worked.
Cliff was probably still drunk from the night before when he did the fall off the roof.
Make sure you get this.
Okay, boss.
And it was only, I think it was about a 12-foot drop.
And he falls off the roof, bounces up, breaks a rib, breaks his nose, and he's staggering over to me after the film that's been cut, going, Jesus, I look like Corky the cat, my nose. I snap it back into place.
We're not shutting down the production because I'm injured. He'd go on if he was mangled.
And then, of course, it went from bad to worse with Cliff and injuries on that production.
You're making an action movie. Accidents do happen.
He runs to the water and dives in, not realising how shallow it is.
He hit the rocks. They're only about a few inches below it, that boom.
Remember that? That's in the film, yeah.
So not only had he got a broken nose and a broken rib, next thing you know, he's got cuts on his face and his nose is twisted again. He's like, unbelievable.
Was it really an accident?
No, he just looked at himself in the mirror and passed out.
I was playing a character, a mafia boss called Gino Verardi.
Look, what do you say we get away for a while? Fly off someplace.
My wife in it was going to be Susan George from Straw Dogs. There was some disaster happened and she had to go to America, and the next lady who's going to play my wife was Fiona Fullerton.
We have to have one professional actor.
They're able to get a major actor to be in their film.
On the understanding that I take second billing to you, nothing less.
Well, I'll see about that.
She was in the Bond movie at the time, View to a Kill.
Has James Bond finally met his match?
The personal lives of Susan George and Fiona Fullerton were oddly connected, as Susan George had had an affair with Simon McCorkindale, who was Fiona Fullerton's boyfriend at the time. So a couple of weeks working with Cliff and his merry band of filmmakers was probably quite attractive.
I've read the first draft of your script. The actions are great, but then your action always was good. But the dialogue stinks.
I think the first moment of any panic that I had was the very first time that Fiona asked me what her motivation was for a scene.
I've just tidied up a few rough edges.
What Fiona must have thought, I don't know, but she hit it very well.
Feel free, don't want loud.
We were all in perpetual puzzlement.
You need a little bit of guidance from the director.
Don't fluff your lines.
It was all a bit kind of loose and a bit... It was a bit of an excitement as opposed to a job, I suppose. Apart from Fiona and Brett Sinclair, I don't think anybody else in it was schooled as an actor.
I think maybe I've got something to say about this.
Pizza connection. Do you know, I'm not quite sure what that was all about.
You say nothing, boy. This is men's talk.
But it was a nice location to shoot again, basically.
Ibiza.
Come on, Phoebos.
Phoebos is Jane Verardi's personal assistant.
Jane, I'm worried.
Boyfriend trouble?
Can't you be serious?
I got along extremely well with Fiona Fullerton. We arrived top of the gangplank and there's all this paparazzi. But then they had the barriers for the actual holidaymakers watching what's going on. There were thousands of people. And the Spanish television there, the Spanish press was there. This is how big it was.
She's the greatest publicity machine since King Kong.
Yeah, but that guy took a fall.
I don't think Cliff was very much about performance and structure. I think Cliff was actually about action. And to him, the car was the most important thing in a Ibiza connection.
They bought a Capri with a sort of cardboard rocket on it. But the Capri was lovely.
People criticised him for spending so much money on the car, but what they didn't know is that he planned to use that car in another movie, one called Striker. So he saw it as saving money, and in a way it would have been had the production happened, but unfortunately it didn't. It was probably the production, a watershed production, when it was the last time Cliff had decent cars. And I'm not going to say any more at this stage, but you will see how it all unravels from a motoring perspective.
Oh.
Cut! There were certainly times when I was aware that we had run out of money.
When can I have the money?
I'll send Phoebus with the banker's draft.
But it never stopped the shooting.
You also have a problem. The problem we had in Ibiza was aeroplanes constantly coming over. So the soundtrack was of no use to anybody.
We didn't actually have a sound recordist every day. A lot of it was, directional, mic on the camera.
They realised they couldn't use lots of the sound they'd recorded.
It was me and Cliff who were going to play all the characters.
And that ain't good.
Cliff did Brett's part.
I know you don't like me, but I do love Jane.
I did pretty much the rest of them. I can't understand it. Can't understand what?
Remember, it's not my voice.
Could easily get killed performing those stunts.
Max, I'm not happy.
Well, he would complain. He's not going to say, oh, that's a brilliant voice.
Now look here. How dare you? That felt damn good to me.
I had so many voices to do. I was thinking, how can I change this voice from that voice? Well, I'll go higher or I'll go lower.
Stop thinking of sex all the time. It's all very well for you. You are married.
It was very difficult.
Oh, he must be exhausted.
He asked me to dub for Fiona Fullerton's voice.
Just a few minor alterations.
So that involved going to Barcelona for a week.
I'll finish this film.
I'm Jane Varady, apparently. Yeah, I haven't seen that film.
It was abysmal in many ways.
The film is crap. The script is crap.
The problem for Cliff with Ibiza Connection, I think he took the failure and the debts that he was doing the honourable thing with him paying off, that Pedro Juan and Jose Maria Garcia had left.
We're still owing half the money from the Ibiza Connection because the backers didn't pay the rest of the money.
It was just soul destroying to him. I've never seen him look so desolate. We came back and found Cliff had so many debts. That was when Cliff had to sell not only Striker, but his Mazda RX-7. You've been in the sunshine, you've been on the sands, you've been in the warm ocean. It's been fantastic. You've lived a dream. Return home, and there you are in rainy Manchester. It was devastating to see how, when he lost money big time, the money was wasted because the film never materialized, that he would go through a depressive cycle. So there's always a cycle of sort of boom and bust in Cliff's life. It took its toll on him because he had nothing else to go to for once. So it was a very bleak Christmas period.
But they did turn to one of the tried and tested exploitation film methods to try and get investors interested, which was to shoot shorter promos showing what they would be able to deliver.
There are glimpses of other movies that were never completed. Mason's War.
Concept of a SAS soldier back from the Falklands War.
Blind Side of God.
And it was about a vigilante hunting paedophiles down and a cop.
The heartbreaking torture was about to start. But for the organizers of this horrific crime, the nightmare was just about to begin.
Which has a very striking, gravelly voiceover about how Cliff's central character is going to come back and get his revenge on the paedophile.
Johnny Zero. To the law, he was a renegade. To members of the paedophile, he was a nightmare.
There was one thing that no one expected in the mid-80s was to get to see Cliff dancing around a studio in a nappy Tremendous fun was had. At Dave Kent Watson's studio, we're doing this thing called Harrissing Moments, the play on words for Jerry Harris, who wanted to sell the idea into Granada Studios, so to make a promo at Dave Watson's to do that.
Crappies, the strong ones.
And Tokyo Sunrise.
Now, we don't hand over the stuff. We take the money, and we kill him.
We have this insidious plot from Japanese gangsters to take over the world by having a genetically engineered energy drink.
A seemingly harmless soft drink to which has been added an insidiously addictive drug produced in Tokyo and appropriately called Tokyo Sunrise.
Films that will sadly never know what they were going to be like. We can only get a taster of them.
The royalties from his music made his money. Royalties from his music financed the films, his living, everything that he did. Everything was from the royalty of his music.
So it's very frustrating because around the same time of the Blind Side of God fiasco falling apart, this was when the music royalty flow of money tended to become more erratic. Moonstalker Cliff conceived that when we were in Iceland the previous year and stayed in an apartment with a poltergeist while we were living in Reykjavik, working at the Icelandic National Theatre. And he loved the supernatural, you know, mystical beast, cryptozoology. He was a great fan of that, and he came up with the idea of doing a film about the Beast of Exmoor.
Miss O'Neill is seeking information concerning the Beast of Exmoor.
It's a terrible thing you're asking.
Why is that, Mr. Rooney?
It's touched by the devil.
So next thing you know, we're making a Beast of Exmoor movie, but it wasn't made in Exmoor, it was made in Manchester.
It's basically an American werewolf in Eccles.
Something evil moves within the forest. Moonstalker.
And apparently there's another cut out there called
Predator, The Quietus.
And it marked quite a significant shift in their approach to filmmaking. They had a different director who Cliff had looked at working with before, Leslie McCarthy, and The Blind Side of God was a project that they did the teaser for. They were much more ambitious here, and they decided to shoot on film.
It was shot on Super 16 film.
I remember that because everybody was a little bit more uptight about that.
Turning over. Action.
Still, no comment on the Beast of Exmoor, Superintendent?
It wasn't like, we'll go again, because, you know, now it is going to start costing a lot of money. So I think there was a slight nervousness with everybody that was participating in the film relating to that.
My God, that's all we need.
He had a good cinematographer, a guy called David Tattersall.
Now, if you look up David Tattersall now, he's worked on some amazing Hollywood big-budget productions.
He shot Con Air, he shot Green Mile, the first 3 Star Wars movies. Fantastic cinematographer. The Exmoor shots were the villages of Downham and Chipping in the area north of Manchester.
What do you mean you'll be moving into the forest tomorrow?
This is a luxury hotel full of people. I don't think the Beast has a room here. And I've got to be where the action is.
But the actual main location was at Middlewood Scout Camp in Worsley in Manchester.
I would like to get to Middlewood. Could you help me?
When it comes to penny pinching, I think the best or worst, depends on which way you look at it, example of this was on Moonstalker. And Paul Flanagan, who's a brilliant production manager, and he's very, very resourceful when it comes to getting props. And he managed to source a safari Land Rover for Cliff's character, the big game hunter. Would have been absolutely perfect.
I'd got this thing fully kitted out, and it was what a big game hunter would have. And he said, "It's all right, Paul, I've sorted it." I said, "You sure? You've got one?" So I then cancelled my Safari Land Rover, which I should add we got for nothing. And he showed up on set, and he showed up, and I thought, "Oh, where's the Land Rover?" And he said, "Oh, we didn't get it, we've got this."
He opted for a little Fiat Panda 4x4.
I said, "You are joking." He said, "But it's got a bull bar on the front." And I said, "No, Cliff, don't do this, please."
Why not?
you're a big game hunter. He said, no, it'll be all right. I said, I beg to differ, but it's your production.
The local company said, oh yes, you can have this for publicity purposes, but you can have it for several months. So that in Cliff's book was far better than having the right car for the job.
Which in many ways epitomises Cliff's working methods.
And that was it. Cliff was a bit of a penny pincher and spent the money in the wrong direction.
But that's what makes the film also entertaining.
Moonstalker was an interesting production for me personally because it was the first decent sort of role that I was given by Cliff.
Well, if it isn't the big game hunter from Africa, Daniel Kane.
And I played what is in effect the leading villain. And I was covering up my murders under the guise of being the Beast of Exmoor. I put this it's a very good rubber mask that Ray Nicholas made.
I think the total budget for that was about £180 to £200 for doing that.
Moonstalker. Is it man, beast, or a demon from hell?
But frustratingly, and no one could ever explain why, least of all Cliff, why a decent production that was well made, that was well edited, was never released.
That is a great pity.
A great pity. Why is that?
There's a lot of money to be made.
That's right.
The old Del Boy, you know, next year we'll be millionaires. That's how Cliff lived day by day. I think that's how he got through day by day.
It was always disappointing, you know, because you know the kind of the amount of work that Cliff had put into these things.
And it became frustrating for a lot of the people that were in the productions with Cliff, that you go, well, really wish we could see one that was released.
He is the eye of Satan. He is here amongst us to prepare his master's return.
Eye of Satan was a crazy film to work on.
But the biggest shock was to find that he'd chosen Dave Kent Watson to partner with him on that, because it was almost like, well, better the devil you know.
Many people thought that after the trouble they'd had making Eve Island, that they might not work again together.
And it was almost certainly because Cliff thought it was just better to be in production, even though it had to be Dave Kent Watson at the time, than not be in production at all.
The story is a mixture of action and the supernatural. A hunter steals the precious stone, the Eye of Satan, as a ritual slaughter in Africa.
The Eye of Satan was actually some big red sacred stone. Through the power of the stone, Cliff was able to transform himself.
Cliff had a very good idea of what he wanted, but on some occasions he didn't listen, because I said to him, if you are going to present this thing where your eyes are glowing, you need UV active, not fluorescent. But he saw this fluorescent green and thought they were okay and put them in, and no matter which way you lit it, it just looked like you got fluorescent green lenses in. But Cliff thinking, you know, £300 or £120, I'll get 120, so he just had these green-coloured lenses. I know.
And I felt so sorry for Cliff because they must have hurt.
Yes.
My eyes just used to tear up just watching him try to put them in.
And he said, these are killing me, having these contact lenses. I could quite easily kill you.
Yes, Cliff was very aware of his appearance and he liked to keep himself looking young and tidy.
If a film was coming up, it increases training.
And he used to regularly have his dumbbells on set so that he could quickly pump up before a scene.
And here he appears with a Black Panther.
Jesus!
I remember him bringing it in and everyone was told, you know, it's a wild animal, and it was a wild animal.
Is he dangerous?
And the owner saying, yes, you've got to be very, very careful here. You must not, you can't go like this. You can't put your hand in. Boom. This is the trainer who's training. And the panther nearly took the back of his hand off.
There can't be that many hitmen that have got a panther for a sidekick.
It was only a couple of shots because we couldn't afford it for long. So they basically milked the life out of this thing. I first met Cliff. I got taken to his house in Prestwich by Brian Sterling. Under the apprehension I wanted to be in films, Cliff was making films. So I said, right, OK, yeah, I'll come up. And at the time, I was still fighting, so I was still, like, world champion at the time. And my first time I ever set eyes on Cliff, he had a really nice vest, like, T-shirt on, that he had a pair of scissors cut into pieces, which then, after the years of me knowing, realised it was just a thing with him. He would spend fortunes on really expensive shirts and take a pair of scissors to him because he used to like their necks really wide. Cliff would do anything for anyone. On a production, he worked the hardest. He was first in, he was last out.
Whoever we're dealing with here seems to have superhuman strength.
I was one of 2 coppers who were trying to discover who this person was or thing was, because some of the crimes were so grotesque.
Brett was my, I think he was the sergeant.
Mr. Bendix, don't dig your own grave.
I was a forensic pathologist. I had to examine the dead body.
But what are we looking for? Is it one person?
We never did more than 1 or 2 takes on any of these things.
On the third print, judging by the depth of it, is a person weighing at least 200 pounds.
And it was actually a very funny scene. It wasn't supposed to be.
Exhibit 1. The killer was obviously a lover of animals, and the 2 corpses didn't show views or principles.
Because I played this, I think it was like the Egyptian fella, Camille.
Yesterday was never. Today is forever. Tomorrow is but a promise.
Oh, there was one sequence. You know when you're corpse and you just can't quit laughing.
Here, take this blood money. You have made a big mistake. Oh, God.
The guy couldn't laugh, and it came from down here, and it was just so... And that would just crack me up. I'd just laugh because he was laughing.
But you have made a big mistake.
It's like, that was it. We couldn't get any further. It's about 15 minutes of trying to do this damn thing, and every time we come to it, one of us sniggers, and then that's the whole thing gone again.
Here, take this blood money. Oh, bollocks.
I'll take it, I need it. I was brought in because, sadly, Jerry Harris was originally going to play the part of Bronstein, but he couldn't because of his work commitments. And it was a bit of a challenging one for me because it was a different character than originally intended. And so I was a very softly spoken, undertone gangster. Welcome to Frankenstein's Castle. We shot that in what was a converted carpenter's workshop, which was in Droylsden. The effects chap, Stevie Tomko, owned that and built the set.
We sort of designed it around what we had. We had my workshop with a split level, so we had a chat about putting the panther cage up there and then moving along Cliff's shower and then dropping down into his front room, and then at the other end we could fit the altar in.
Jesus, this place is... just gives you the creeps.
We built a few more sets in there, the police station, the funeral parlour when the coffin got hit with a shotgun.
The Eye of Satan coffin scene. That was memorable because Cliff had bought a coffin, never thinking to get one that might fit an adult male. And unfortunately, Paul Gribben, who fortunately is thin, but he's quite tall. And he's in this coffin, and with every cheating method we could devise, so you wouldn't see how bent his knees were in this coffin. He's like this, way too short. I don't know who it was designed for. But it was cheap, so we bought it.
Everybody used to take the mick out of Cliff, you know, the character. Nobody's safe with Cain the Beast. You know, he slaughters gangsters, he murders priests and policemen, and he drives a sale van hire.
Which seems so local and parochial for this ambitious project.
I did ask him at the time, I actually remember saying, Cliff, how can the devil's disciple who can do anything, why is he driving a sale van hire van? He said, incognito.
And I said, Cliff, that really looks naff. I said, look, just give me 20 minutes, I'll get some waterproof paint, we can paint over that. And I thought, we'll get away with that, and then just wash it off afterwards. And he said, no, I can't do that. I said, why not? He said, they've let me have the van because I can advertise it. And I went, oh.
Of course, Sale Van Hire said you could have it for 6 months if you were in the movie. So no matter how ridiculous it was for the devil's disciple to be driving around, no matter how incognito he wanted to be in a Sale Van Hire truck, it was all about Cliff having the truck for 6 months because he had no other transport at the time.
Will anything or anyone ever break through to you?
There were some things which he wasn't very organised with. We had booked a forest, and we got down there, and he and the director, who was David Kent Watson at the time, said, OK, we'll get set up. And I said, OK, where's the lights? And Cliff said, David's got them. And I said to David, where's the lights? And he said, Cliff's got them. I said, I take it we have no lights.
So they lit it with car headlamps, but it meant that the actors had to do the scenes on their knees.
There he is. Don't miss.
The next thing was, we're supposed to have this mist that's floating past. I said, where's the smoke machine? Who's got the smoke machine? Right, no. David's got the smoke machine. Cliff's got the smoke machine. I went, this is not very good, chaps, I said. And David had a Jaguar at the time, and he put it on full choke. That was like carbon monoxide poisoning, but that again comes to not being organised.
Jeanette Gray and I re-met on the Eye of Satan, and that was where we sowed the seeds for our relationship and eventually got married the following year.
Cliff was the best man at our wedding.
Because he had, in effect, brought us together.
Jackie and I, we love you very much. And it's been great seeing you guys so happy.
Who are you?
He is the Eye of Satan.
The Eye of Satan, which was, again, another production that was never fully completed properly, as far as we know, probably as far as Cliff knew. And that fell by the wayside.
Let's just finish this, market it, edit it, get it sleeved up and get it on a shelf so you're earning some money back, because that's a thing that never really happened.
I'm going to admit something on camera now. I have never seen any of the films.
When you put a lot into a film and you don't actually get a chance to see it, it is frustrating.
Beware, for in our search to discover the secrets of heaven, we may only unleash the wrath of hell.
Firestar, that was a hellish shoot. It was hellish because it was studio-based.
I'll see you all in hell.
A space movie. Do you know, thinking back on these things, we did have to do some stuff, didn't we?
She's closing fast. Right along. Normal station.
Firestar was undoubtedly the most ambitious film Cliff and I had made together, with an impressive above-the-title cast. And all this was within the budget of £80,000.
Originally, we were going to get Oliver Reed, and I think they were just a bit worried about his lifestyle.
I was doing the world.
So we got Oliver Tobias.
So I thought, yes, I'll give it a go, see what happens. The script was quite good.
I need to know. You know what? The facts and the truth. Hey, now listen.
Cliff thought he'd got Oliver Reed. So when Oliver Tobias arrived at the studio, Cliff assembled everybody.
Everyone give him a round of applause. Oliver Reed. And everyone looked round and went, where? He said, Oliver Reed.
Where?
And this bloke went, I'm Oliver Tobias.
You're withholding information.
No, Cliff, I didn't know who he was. Knew nothing.
One of the great mysteries about Cliff is that he had so many aliases.
Who are you? What's your name?
That's the problem. I didn't know it was Cliff. I think I was introduced to him as Mike.
Which, for someone who wanted to be so famous, is really counterintuitive. It's counterproductive, because in one movie he's Mike Sullivan.
He's trying to restart his career as somebody else. This is a brilliant stroke. I hadn't got a clue.
Mike Sullivan was probably from Mike Kirby, who John Wayne played in The Green Berets, and John L. Sullivan from the movie Gentleman Jim with Errol Flynn. Then we have Peter Reno. That's another alias that he used for his music. John Agar was another one, and John Agar was a character in a John Wayne movie again. So there were all these aliases, did nothing but confuse people.
I think it was because he was in so much stuff, he wanted to be so known as somebody different.
Didn't know he was a writer. I didn't even know his real name. Fuck's sake.
Cut the crap, Harry. We made it together.
He was a very quiet, unassuming person. Very friendly and easygoing fella. Well, I knew it was going to be low budget, but I immediately knew something was a bit funny. And when David set up the camera and said, oh, no, I'm going to do a tracking shot, I said, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm doing the camera as well. Turns out he took some good shots and he knew what he was doing.
If you believe for one moment I would be pleased with your exploits, gentlemen, you're very much mistaken.
Then we had Charles Gray, of course, from the Bond movies.
Charles Gray. And he's back as Blofeld, 007 style.
Good evening, 007.
I think he got pissed the night before because he was quite red in the face.
As from now, you are relieved of your command of Firestar.
We brought back the alien projectile.
All respect, but that's how it was.
For medicinal purposes only.
Who are you trying to kill? You're an alcoholic.
What happened?
I thought, how's that going to go the following day? But he was there sweating and doing his stuff, and it was absolutely bang on.
Script was being changed. That's the other thing you see with Charles Gray and Oliver. Oliver Tobias wasn't too bad. He did things on the fly. But Charles Gray, he wanted things certain ways.
We need time.
So it was a bit of a problem with some of the things he was doing.
Why?
They were a headache.
Well, I don't think there's anything else we need to discuss.
So it had this kind of madness about it.
We were nice guys. I got on really well with Oliver Tobias. I ended up teaching him martial arts outside because it was a sunny day.
That's what I'm like, try to learn, you know.
I got on really well with him. He was a great guy, but it was a headache when Cliff wanted to do things like this. You know, oh, no, they don't do like this. You've got to do this. Oh, you need to give them a break now. You know, and he's going, no, you know, we're like this. Come on.
I was on it perhaps 3 or 4 days.
I think it was about a third of the budget.
So let him go home, he costs too much.
Look, Harry, I'm sorry that you got your wings clipped.
But then obviously you realise you stick a name on the front of something, it might sell. So that's what he put up with. He wasn't a mega fan of doing it. He preferred it to stay with the family doing stuff.
When you work with Cliff, it was like a family thing and like an atmosphere on every film.
So my daughter Chloe got involved. It was like, we need a little girl. Right, here's Chloe.
Well, I think I must have been about 6, and they would instruct me on how to do something, or my dad would read a line and say, you know, look at this person, do this, and then just naturally, you know, naturally do it.
Yes, please tell us a story, Trooper.
Can you tell me a story, Trooper?
Very well, then.
I don't know if it was good as it was then, but...
OK. So I had a catering unit, and my other half, she used to do the catering for the film.
The actors would do the catering on it.
They kind of spun that in to make movie food.
So that's what we're eating here.
Brett asked me, would I do spaghetti bolognese? And I did it for Oliver. And obviously they were shooting a bit longer than expected. And he was explaining to me later on how to do spaghetti.
I cook myself. I like spaghetti. I like spaghetti bolognese.
I don't think it was to his liking.
She tried, but it wasn't quite right.
You might remember that.
I'm sorry about that. Tell her I'm sorry.
He's out to lunch.
Firestar was a full team effort, and we used the same studio yet again. And we had a science fiction spaceship built there.
He showed me the set, which was really quite incredible, very believable. Tremendous detail.
It was changing the sets all the time because we had a limited space. We had one corridor about 30 foot long.
We actually designed the corridors so you could flip bits round so it looked different.
And it worked. In the film, it looks like different corridors, and the spaceships looks very big.
They decided they'd be able to do their special effects in a shed.
Yes, that's right.
And if you wanted a shootout on a spaceship, where better to go than Laser Quest on Whitworth Street in the centre of Manchester?
Grab a laser, I'll see you there.
We didn't actually build the monsters. We had our model maker who was freelance, Pete Minster. He built the monster on our specs.
The monster in the film has teeth in its hands. So it had tusks here, but then when it opened its hands, it had like teeth inside, and that was like his twist.
And when it grabs you, this is the nice bit, it eats the flesh off your face.
Of course, we shot at Jodrell Bank as well, which is another major location.
Got into Jodrell Bank itself.
And he only read the guy on the sign at the side that says, if there's a problem, contact such a body. And somebody
So
says...
he got the such a body in?
No, well, somebody come and said, what do you want? He said, well, we've had permission to film here. He said, who off? And he just read that chap's name on that board. And he went, all right, coming in then.
When you look at it against some of the other lower budget science fiction films that were being made in the period, I think it does stand up. And so it's not surprising that it found some international releases.
Well done, Forster. I think it did. I think I've actually seen a full film of that in German.
Was war das? Duke! Melden, Duke! Trooper, hast du's erwischt?
It looked good, you know, because they didn't have Mancunian accents.
Schließ hinter ihm ab. Jerry Combe, Funkkontakt zur Erde herstellen.
I didn't have a clue what they was talking about, but the actual film looked all right, you know.
I feel as though we're being watched.
Yeah, me too.
I know it turned up in Germany. I've heard it been a few other places.
And were you successful?
But there wasn't one penny that went to Cliff.
It just sort of disappeared, man, like zoop.
Not one penny.
I just know we both gonna end up like two penniless Johnny Torres.
My relationship with Cliff, he was my father. My father passed away many years ago, and he would call me son. Everyone knew me as his son. It literally was like a father-son relationship we had.
The situation is going to get worse.
In breaking away after Tokyo Sunrise from working closely with Cliff on movies like Firestar, it allowed us to take a greater overview of how Cliff was emotionally.
Cliff used to sometimes have times in between his films when he'd get quite down.
It's almost depression states, manic depression states, because he would go from the highs to the lows became deeper.
And he'd be quite quiet, but generally he never used to talk about it.
And it became more obvious because we were not so closely involved. We were looking on from more of a distance, an objective distance, and we could see this. It was getting quite sad. He spent a lot of time with Stuart, which I'm glad about, because they were training together. They lived a stone's throw apart in those days.
He literally was living in a bedroom, and it used to break my heart.
The flat above the Vietnam curry restaurant behind me was Cliff's last home. And it was actually the guest of his ex-girlfriend's mother who lived there, and he had a sad little room.
He came from being nothing, a young lad, Eccles, and he ended up, I wouldn't say being nothing, but he had next to nothing.
The problem is with living the dream is that you wake up from a dream, and there is always a time when you wake up and it's what you had, the magic, the lifestyle, the money, the women, the fast cars, they weren't there.
I was aware that Cliff became quite obsessed with his training in these later years.
Better get myself in shape before I hit the big screen.
Fanatical, absolutely fanatical. I mean, he used to train twice a day.
At one point, around that time, he decided to enter a bodybuilding contest.
The Grandad Universe competition at Salford Tech, despite the fact that he wasn't old enough to be in the competition.
He didn't even place. That damaged his ego again.
Because basically his ego had got that badly hit that he knew he was getting older.
So he came away from that with a bee on his bonnet to try and train harder.
And he realised that the people who were winning were on steroids. So he started taking the steroids.
He dabbled in drugs, you know, from cannabis, cocaine to steroids for the bodybuilding.
He just kept grasping for that, you know, that little bit of starlight.
The anabolic steroids also had an effect on Cliff's personality. He was suddenly less the positive, upbeat, happy-go-lucky character. It increased his sensitivity to his insecurities and brought them to the surface more.
He always had pad and pencil writing shit all the time. There was tons of stuff. And he'd written like a poem. It was stunning, but it was all set about his life, which he basically says, it was called Alone in My Room. And the last line in it was something like, the rain runs down the window, which is fine for everyone looking in because they don't see the rain running down my face.
So now what?
Manchester. Child pornography is rife. Children aren't safe anymore. The fact is, no one can be safe anymore.
GBH2, I think, really gives an indication that maybe at this point He's looking at his past glories, so GBH has been one of his most successful films, particularly when one thinks that a number of the films that he'd worked on had had very limited, if no, release at all, whereas the original GBH was quite widely seen.
Cliff and David Kent Watson figure, let's go back to basics, let's go back to Donovan.
A decade after GBH, we decided to make GBH 2, continuing the story of Donovan, who had obviously survived being blasted with a shotgun.
So by revisiting that film and that character and that world, he's maybe hoping to rekindle some of that success.
We got a message from Mr. Keller.
But at the time, there was a series on TV called GBH, so there's just some copyright thing, so they changed it to Lethal Impact.
And I think some of the problems with this film maybe also then reflect the fact that getting funding for these sorts of projects is much more difficult.
Cliff would scrimp and scrape every penny he had.
And from now on, we'll do things my way.
Who got the money and where it came from, I did not know.
And he'd get money out of anyone he could. Some gangsters I know who were well known in Manchester, they put money up, and I'm going, this is like naughty money, this, mate, you know.
I may walk close to the sewer, but at least I know which way the filth is moving.
It was interestingly the time when a very famous nightclub in Manchester, the Hacienda, was being closed down because Manchester had suddenly got the name Gunchester. Gang crime was at an all-time high, and they capitalised on that idea.
It brings some of the ideas that the tempting snippet they shot for Blind Side of God suggested.
To members of the paedophile, he was a nightmare.
So the whole sort of paedophile storyline is present here.
We all know he uses them for pushing drugs and getting young kids to go in his porno movies.
But there's also maybe a much more melancholic air to this film. The central character seems to be much more world-weary.
There's some heavy stuff going down. Are you pissed? I'm pissed.
He's less able to obviously step into the fray straight away as he was in the original film. You know, there's scenes of him waking up and he seems to be hungover, he seems lethargic. And one wonders whether, because of the continual difficulties with funding, with getting the films released, maybe that reflects Cliff's character at that time a little bit more.
You ugly bastard.
It was supposed to be shot in Malta originally, but again, Dave Kent Watson and the Malta Film Board and finance meant that it very soon came back to Manchester.
We shot out in Manchester City Centre, of course.
Shooting guns off in Magistrate Square in Manchester, which is where all the courts are. I'd be like, it's not even borderline illegal, this is illegal, this. You go, yeah, but if we do it quick, how are you going to get away with that? She goes, we're not going to we've got away with it. And I'd be like, right, OK. He quoted it once, he said, we get away with things because we're lovable rogues.
And it's lovely to see Chloe in them when she's so young in a school uniform.
Yeah, when I saw the clip, I couldn't believe it, because that was the hat I used to wear for school, and that was my actual school uniform. I don't know how the school would have felt about that. I mean, it's shocking enough to find out it was in a movie, but never mind, what about a paedophile ring? I had no idea.
Excuse me, sweetheart.
Yeah, I need to have a word with my mum about what went on there.
Well, if it was today's day and age, I mean, there's no way she would have been in it. It's just that I didn't realise.
Reverend Spinner?
Yes? I played a perverted vicar, and I think I only got the part because I had the costume.
I believe you carry a love for children far beyond the practice.
Derogatory statements made by misinformed gossips.
And we went to the church in the deep, deep snow, and I had to die then.
There's a scene where he busts in. Who the fuck are you?
Well, I'm holding this, sweetie. As far as you're concerned, I'm God.
And he gets the gun, lifts me up from the cheek with the gun like that, and then you see my feet come off the floor.
How's this for a blowjob, fellas?
And then you just see all these inners at the wall, yeah? And we shot that one day, and then I went back on the Sunday for all the prosthetics to be made up. It took hours, and basically my head just hits the floor, and it's all like a skeleton blown away.
And with GBH2, I think it's interesting to reflect that Cliff also was thinking about a third entry into what would be called these days the GBH franchise. They were thinking in some way of a third film. Certainly there are versions of GBH2 which end with a, you know, almost a James Bond-like Donovan will be back.
This guy, and I'm not even going to mention names because he's still around and he's a proper well-known fella in the Badland circuit. And he just give money. He makes film. He said, no, I understand. It's all right, you're straight with me, I'm straight with you. We ended up putting a premiere on of the film in his club. I was like, oh shit, if this goes wrong, we're all going home with lead boots. The room was full of proper gangsters. I'm talking like Cray-style gangsters. And I'm like, oh shit. Cliff was like, whoa, hugging everyone. Film never went anywhere. The guy chucked up a shitload of money, I swear. A lot of money. The man brought a lot of money into the film and never went anywhere.
The up and down finances, the not being able to necessarily repay investors in the way they hoped.
So many things we have to do.
All of that, I think, maybe led to, you know, less energy in the production process. And I think that's reflected in the fact that GBH2 is the last feature-length thing they make. He's still trying to make the films. He's still got the desire, the ambition, but maybe the knockbacks are now starting to take their toll.
Unfortunately, Cliff, if we're looking at faults, he lacked follow-through. And he would produce a movie, and the moment it hit difficulties in post-production or business, the business side was something that he never really understood. So that's why he always retreated into what he used to know. Let's go into another production.
Always. There was always something on the horizon, looking forward to tomorrow. We'll do today, but this is going to be the next thing which is going to come up and it's going to be fantastic.
And I'm thinking, well, hang on, we've not finished that other one yet. Oh, that'll be okay, son. That'll be fine. That'll work out now. And of course, it never did.
He tried to fund things himself, which he ended up being bankrupted himself, really.
Things weren't working in the movie industry. He wasn't making money.
I think he made most of his money from his music.
He was having battles with the music royalty people. I believe that was DeWolf, to try and get his rightful royalties out of them, and that was a struggle. He was a bit lost.
He'd come to me with the checks from PRS. I'd put them through my bank, then I'd give him the cash, because he didn't want the money to go through his bank because he'd taken out loans so he could make a film, and they were going to try and take the money back any which way they can.
Brian and I had a video company called Major Vision.
Since Cliff was obviously struggling financially, we offered him some jobs here and there, and he was very good in instruction movies like Fitness Over 40, because he was over 40 and very fit.
And then after that was a massage technique video. And I remember I'd hired Shrigley Hall with a four-poster bed and a model. And Cliff had white hair by then. I think he actually dyed it totally white.
And he was very adept. He was a quick learner. Yeah, could do it really well.
I was quite impressed with Cliff.
Yeah, it was just nice to be able to give him back to at a time he needed.
But Cliff doesn't give up, and I think that's, you know, Cliff Twemlow all over. He's still having ideas, and they come up with the ideas on Bad Weekend.
You've had one bad weekend, Mr. Ferguson.
This film pilot was an experiment in the making of a television series of shorter films, each one to be shot in its entirety over just one weekend. It drew heavily on actors from Salford and Manchester who were used to the high work rate which was a feature of all our films.
It was like weekend shooting. We're doing something this weekend, right, come on. And off we'd go.
And we all came down. Dave Rankin brought his own tent. We all kipped in his tent. Everyone literally just rocked up for nothing. There was £1,000 in the budget. Dave Kenneth Watson took most of that.
David Kenneth Watson, I just got the Hi8, some small camera.
The Sony TR-75 with stereo sound.
Oh, Bad Weekend was great. That was filmed in Alderley Edge and Style Country Park. That film was shot in about 3 days.
Rise, you lazy bastards. It's daylight.
You have to kick me that hard.
Well, how does this feel?
I played the lead in Bad Weekend. where I was supposed to be a champion archer.
I came first in the competition earlier this year and I put it in the trailer and forgot I had it.
I had a bow from a film I was working on.
Have you seen this?
You just see it and go, ooh, I like the look of that.
And then the story develops whereby this gang, led by Cliff, playing the part of a really evil, nasty brute.
You attack my boys without provocation. You could get down for GBH.
Goes and rapes a young girl who's camping with her father.
Little girl, have you ever been fucked?
Now look here.
One of the funny things was when they filmed the rape scene, that was inside a tent. And we're outside, sat on a log with the rifles and the handguns, and there was people walking past. There's people shouting and screaming inside the tent, being raped, and we stood there. We sat outside with guns, and people were wondering what the hell was bloody going on. I said, "It's okay, love. It's just a film we were doing."
Oh, it's happening. No. It's before the injection.
Oh, it is?
Oh, yeah, right from the beginning.
Oh, Christ, you two. God almighty.
I need a cigarette.
Oh.
So did you ever get paid for any of these roles?
Next question.
I never got paid well. I mean, for a bad weekend, we got about £50 each.
None of us had enough money. We were all doing stuff for free.
All right, who wants a raisin? Come on, get paid. Get paid. Go and get your money.
Do you know what? It didn't matter because we enjoyed ourselves doing it.
Nobody asked for a penny. Everyone did it just for the love. And it wasn't just for the love of being in a film, it was just for the love of Cliff.
The idea that Cliff's beginning to play characters that are maybe a bit more jaded or faded or no longer in their prime was something that interested him. And he did work with David Kent Watson on a project called Hogan's Champion, which was about a character who was no longer the force he used to be.
I've travelled thousands of miles looking for you to present you with a get-rich-quick proposition.
No way, Hogan. Every time you come with one of those propositions, you get rich quick and I get hospitalized.
Cliff had once been a fairground prizefighter, and he wrote a story based on a gone-to-seed boxer being enticed to make a comeback by his former manager.
Hogan's Champion's back.
Which was to be an action film dosed with liberal amounts of humour.
That'll have to go.
Unfortunately, they didn't get too much in the can for that one.
But it was not to be. Cliff died before any of the proposed filming in Salford could be started.
Nobody dies forever.
About a month before he died, he told me that he was on 10 times the normal amount of testosterone and steroids, which eventually led to his heart attack.
We were training in Blues Gym, which is used to be in Sharton, not far from here, and we worked out together. And his last words with me, and he always used to say it was, "See you tomorrow, boy, we'll be bigger." And he went home that night and had a massive heart attack. I got a phone call about 2 o'clock in the morning or something from Jackie, who used to be like his girlfriend, saying Cliff's dead.
In fact, on the autopsy, it was said that his heart had grown that big.
His heart was 2.5 times the normal size.
You know, because it's a muscle, there was furrows where it had been pressing on his rib cage. It's caused his death.
A tragedy, that.
It was never going to be the same again.
Well, nobody lives forever, do they?
And the next thing, we're all at the funeral.
Religion, wasted on me, Gino.
Behind me is St Wilfrid's Church in Northenden, and this is where Cliff's funeral service was held, and indeed where his ashes are interned. On the day of the funeral, the place was packed. In fact, the streets around us were packed as well. It was wall-to-wall people. It attracted the press, people from all walks of life, the showbiz community, gangsters, police officers. His films and his books and his persona reached far and wide, and he was much loved by pretty much everyone who met him.
And I remember the vicar introduced a couple of pieces of music that he wanted to play that were composed by Cliff. In his words, he said, these 2 pieces of music we're going to listen to were composed by Cliff. And we listened to the first one, can't remember what it was, but it certainly was, it was Cliff's film. And then the second one came on, and it was actually Debussy's Clair de Lune that played, the classic. What the vicar had forgot to say was that actually the second one was Cliff's favourite classical piece. And so there was people sort of, there was eyes flirting around when Clair de Lune was out, as if Cliff didn't compose this.
I think he'd be up there looking down going, yeah, I think he'd be laughing his head off. I can hear him laughing now.
Cliff would have been happy that he'd have thought, the vicar thought, that he'd have written that.
And when Max Beasley, outside the church after the funeral, said, the problem is, it's like saying to someone Mickey Mouse is dead, because it's the larger-than-life character that is immortal in our minds, and now he's gone.
You know we're mad. We hate it while we're here. We miss it when we're not here.
He also lived by the ethos that nobody dies forever, and he used that line at the end of Ibiza Connection.
Nobody dies forever.
His own words have become his epitaph almost, nobody dies forever, that his legacy lives on. So, in reality, he's not died forever, has he? I just wish he could have lived to see the success and the legacy that he's left.
Cliff is now an inspiration to a whole generation of filmmakers in the north of England, and his reputation's spreading far and wide.
The films are the greatest type of exploitation film. You laugh at them, you laugh with them, but they're also entertaining. They're brilliant.
Some great times with Cliff. Really good times.
I see what we did, and I think, yeah, that's how it all starts, you know, that real desire, no matter what.
Cliff was one of those people who you were drawn to because of his persona.
You could be yourself with him. He would never judge you.
Oh, he was a proper light. He was a lovely fella. But the one thing is, he always cared and looked after people.
Because he could use his fists, but he could use his brain and his heart.
One of his biggest gifts to people was daring them to fulfill their dreams.
Loads of people sit around and dream, and maybe loads of people think they haven't got time to do any of these kind of creative endeavours. He seemed to throw himself in absolutely 100% into every one of those endeavours.
He certainly lived to his own dreams.
I said to him, Cliff, I said, you've done more in 1 year than most people have done in a lifetime.
Everybody loved Cliff. You couldn't help but like him. It's a shame that you never met him, because you would remember him for the rest of your life.
Humble man, driven man, funny man, lovely man, Mancunian man.
Cut. It's a wrap studio. Tea break.